Hello 4S. We're going to continue with our story of the fastest boy in the world and read the next 2 chapters today. Chapter 15. When I was still fast asleep, Mother shook me awake. She had already blown the embers off the fire into a blaze and made some tea. I groaned when I tried to sit up. Every muscle in my body was stiff, and even my bones seemed to ache. Father was outside. I could hear him talking quietly to Lucky. Donkeys like being talked to. It makes them feel safe. He put his head round the door. Isn't that boy up yet? We need to get going. It's nearly 4:30 already. I stood up groggily. We don't change into night clothes in the country, so there's no need to get dressed. Mother wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and put a glass of tea into my hands. Drink up quickly, Solomon. Your father's getting impatient. I nearly scalded my mouth, but it was worth it. The tea woke me up. My first thought was, I can't go all the way back to Addis today. I'm too tired. My second thought was, I'll be riding Lucky. Abba's never let me go that far on her before, and we'll be going on the bus. My third thought was, maybe I'll see Kebede again. And way down at number 4, I thought, Grandfather, he might be dead by now. I was ashamed that Grandfather was only at number 4, especially when I realised, even though it was pitch dark outside, how anxious Abba was. Grandfather was thoughts number 1 to 10 for him. Nothing else counted. I'd never known him be so impatient. Are you going to take all day? He barked at me, as I hobbled over to Lucky and scrambled onto her back. Do you want us to miss the bus? Mother passed us a piece of injera up to me. Eat it as you go along, she said. God go with you and take care. It was still more than an hour to go before the first sight of dawn. Luckily, the moon hadn't set. It wasn't full, but even half moon gives out more light than no moon at all. I thought I knew every centimetre of the path into Kadami, but I'd never gone along it in the dark before, and I was afraid that Lucky would trip over the stones or crash into a thorn hedge. I should have had more faith in her. She knew the way even better than Abba and I did. She went really slowly at first, not being used to the dark, and I heard Abba tutting anxiously behind me. The first part of the way into Kadami was steep and stony. The path was so narrow that 2 people couldn't walk together. We had to go in single file. But once we were down onto the broader, flatter bit of the path, Lucky set off at a great old pace, shaking me to bits. Abba had to walk fast to keep up with her. He could walk alongside me too, now that the path was broader. Now tell me everything again, he said, from the beginning. What happened exactly? So I did. I told him about Cousin Wandu's house, now he hadn't been too pleased to see us. I told him about meeting Ato Elemu, his story of the bullet and the arrow, and about Grandfather jumping onto that horse and out of the moving truck. Did all that really happen, Abba? I asked him. It's the first I've heard of it, but knowing your grandfather, it doesn't surprise me at all. Why didn't he tell you? If it had been me, I'd have wanted to tell everyone. Father thought for a minute. I knew he was in trouble and needed to hide out in the country. Back in those days, after the revolution, everyone was scared of everyone else. I was only a little kid then. If he talked about what had happened, I'd probably have blabbed it all over the place. Later, I suppose, being quiet about the past just became a habit. I don't know why he wanted to bring it all up again. Why did he want to see this Atu Elemu anyway? So I told him about the medal and about how Cousin Wandu had tried to get hold of it first. That Wandu, he said, sounded disgusted. He always was weak and silly. Trust my father to get the better of him. He rubbed his finger along the side of his nose. This medal is valuable then, is it? Really valuable. Did they say how much it's worth? The sky had turned from black to a dull grey, and the stars were going out. Over on the eastern horizon, a strip of pink was showing. It grew brighter minute by minute as the sun rose behind the distant hills. It was easier to see the path ahead now. I didn't want to answer Abba's questions. I knew what he was thinking. He was turning the meadow into money in his mind, just like Cousin Wandu had done. He was thinking of all the things he needed. A new plough, another cow, a school uniform for conduits. I was glad I had the sense to take it out of the money pouch before I left home and tuck it into the corner of the shelf behind Mother's coffee pot. I wanted to get his mind going on another tack, so I rushed on to tell him about the athletes and what it had been like to see them. I didn't say much about Kebede. I didn't think somehow that Abba would approve of him. I hated admitting that I'd lost sight of Grandfather and hadn't found him again till after he'd collapsed and was lying down on the chairs in the shop. What's this hospital they've taken him to then? He said, and at last I stopped talking. I was relieved. I was afraid I was afraid he'd let me have it for abandoning Grandfather. I don't know, I said. Well, how do you propose we find him then? Snapped Abba, sounding really worried again. Cousin Wandu knows where the hospital is. He took him there. I can show you where his house is. He'd tell us, wouldn't he, even if he tried to cheat us. I'd been through all that in my mind already. I planned how I'd show Abba the way from the bus station to Piazza, was pretty sure I could remember it, and then confidently take him right up to Cousin Wandu's house. I was looking forward to that bit, showing off how well I knew my way around Addis Ababa. Abba looked anxiously up at the sky. The edge of the sun had just appeared over the far hills. Even the tiniest slither of its fire rim flooded the whole world with light. In a few minutes it would be right away from the horizon, and the day would have probably begun. "We're late," Abba said. "If we don't hurry, the bus will have filled up and we won't get on it." "What'll we do with Lucky?" "Old Ahmed will look after her. He'll do anything for a bit of money." Everyone knows old Ahmed in Kidami. He sits at the side of the road all day, waiting for someone to give him something to do. "Get off Lucky, Solomon," Abba said. "She's tired, she's slowing down. Sore feet or no sore feet, we'll have to run the last bit." The first few steps were agony, but I ran off the stiffness after a bit, and I forgot about my sore feet. I'd caught Abba's anxiety of him. We'd had to get to Grandfather today. We had to get to Addis. We had to be on the bus. Got there in time, but only just. The bus was waiting with its doors open, and people were climbing on board. There were only 3 seats left at the very back. "Ahmed!" Abba yelled at the old man, sitting on the stone outside the bar. "Look after my donkey for me, will you? I've got to go into Addis." "Addis?" said old Ahmed, pretending to grumble. "Everyone's always going to Addis." But he happily took hold of Lucky's bridle and led her away. My foot was already on the bottom step of the bus, and Abba was right behind me, urging me on, when I heard someone shout, "Solomon!" I pretended I hadn't heard. It's only some old nosy Parker wanted to know how I beat the bus from Addis, I thought, but then the person called again. He sounded really urgent, and something familiar in his voice made me hesitate and turn around. "Get on, will you? Don't take all day," said Abba, giving me a shove. But I'd recognised that voice now. I wormed my way back down the steps and jumped off the bus. "Atu Elemu," I said, astonished. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to fetch you in my car," Atu Elemu said briskly. "I'm going to take you back to Addis. Your grandfather's very ill, I'm afraid. He needs you with him now." Chapter 16. I know I ought to have been thinking about nothing but Grandfather, but I can't help admitting that I enjoyed that ride back to Addis. Atu Elemu's car was small, but that didn't bother me. It's the first time I'd ever been in one, and I thought it was the best. Royalty. Abba sat at the front with Atu Elemu, and I was in the back. Abba didn't say anything at first, and I knew he was feeling shy and strange. He hadn't taken in exactly who Atu Elemu was, and why he'd bothered to come all the way to Kidami to pick us up. Everything was moving too fast for him. He was scared of looking ignorant and stupid. Atu Elemu kept looking sideways at him as he drove along. I think he realised how confused Abba was feeling. "Solomon's friend came to find me," he said, starting to explain. That didn't help. I hadn't told Abba much about Kebede. I was afraid, I suppose, of his disapproval of him. "Solomon's friend?" Abba sounded more mystified than ever. I leaned forward. "Kebede. He was the boy who took me to the bus station." "Ishi, all right," said Abba. He was pretending to understand, I knew. So Atu Elemu went quietly through everything again, telling the story about how his own father and grandfather had been such friends, and the medal. I could tell that Abba was beginning to feel impatient, but was trying to be polite and not show it. "But how is he now? How's my father now?" he burst out at last. "It looked like a heart attack, Solomon said." Atu Elemu hesitated. "I went to the hospital and saw him yesterday afternoon, as soon as I had heard," he said at last. "They're doing everything they can. We can only trust in God." We'd never have managed without Atu Elemu. We probably wouldn't have got in through the hospital doors, and even if the strict-looking doorman had let us through, we'd never have found our way down those long corridors with so many rooms leading off them. My grandfather had always been a giant to me. I don't mean that he was very tall or anything like that. He'd just been the head of the family, the person we respected more than anyone else, and feared, I suppose. Grandfather had always known what to do. He would advise Abba on when it was the right moment to start bringing the harvest. He knew how to treat Lucky when he went lame. He insisted on sending me to school, even when the money for the fees was so tight that we'd have to cut down on food. Nobody had ever argued with Grandfather or answered him back. I'd learned more about him in the last 24 hours than I'd known in the whole of my life. I wished more than anything that I'd had the chance to find out more. I nearly didn't recognise him, lying so still on the bed, under a sheet that was pulled up to his chin. He looked small. His face had gone the same peculiar grey colour it had been in Kebede's uncle's shop. He was asleep. His eyes were closed and his mouth was half open. Abba looked almost stunned by the shock of seeing him there like that. "Aye," he wailed, and dropped his head onto his hands. Atu Elemu walked down the ward past the ranks of beds with sick people lying in them. A crowd of relatives sat beside each one. He brought back a couple of plastic chairs and gently helped Abba onto one. He didn't want to sit down himself. He pointed to the other one, and I perched gingerly on the edge of the seat. Another shock to me was how hopeless Abba seemed to be. I'd never seen him in such a state before, rocking backwards and forwards, sucking the air in through his teeth, muttering prayers and heaving tearful sighs. I honestly thought, what with Grandfather lying so still, that his life had already gone out already. But then he opened his eyes, gave a feeble little cough, turned his head, and saw us. He pulled his hand up from under the sheet and started plucking at it. He looked agitated. Atuolemu knew what to do. He lifted Grandfather's head and tucked his pillow under it. Then he picked up a cup of water from the shelf nearby and held it up to Grandfather's mouth. Grandfather's lips trembled as he tried to drink, and some of the water trickled down his chin. But a bit must have gone in, because I saw his Adam's apple gulp up and down as he swallowed. The water seemed to have done him some good. "You came," he said in a faint voice. "Yes, Father," Abba said. "I'm here. Solomon fetched me. He ran all the way home from Addis." Grandfather's eyes shifted from Abba to me. "I did get on the bus like you told me to," I said, afraid that he'd be annoyed, "but it broke down before we'd even got out into the country." Something sparkled in Grandfather's eyes, I thought, and I couldn't be sure that it was pride. "Good lad," he said. "You're a good lad." I wouldn't have believed my ears if he hadn't said it twice. He never praised me before, not once in my whole 11 years. "The med," he murmured. "What's that?" said Abba, leaning forward. "The medal, I think," I said. I leaned forward too. My head was close to Grandfather's now. "I've got it safe," I told him. "I took it home." His mouth twisted a bit. I think he was trying to smile. "It's yours, boy," he whispered. "For you. Keep." He seemed to be dropping off again. Atuolemu leaned over the bed. "Solomon's a runner, Arrow. He ran a marathon yesterday. No one can believe it. A boy of 11. Grandfather's eyes flickered open. "Runner, good. Run. Steady pace. Eye on the finishing line. Keep on. Nearly." He didn't say any more. A nurse came up. She held his wrist for a moment, but she didn't look at us. She just walked away. We sat for a long time beside Grandfather's bed. Atuolemu went away and came up with some food for us. We didn't want to eat it. He walked down the ward again and talked to other people, leaving us alone with Grandfather. Abba sat without moving. I don't think he took his eyes off Grandfather's face for a single second. I felt lost, to be honest. The hospital was so strange, and everybody seemed so busy. There was such a clatter of trolleys being pushed around, the nurses calling to each other. I felt confused and frightened. Atuolemu came back and talked quietly to Abba from time to time. I couldn't hear what they were saying. Another nurse came and held Grandfather's wrist, as the first one had done. "Is he going to get better?" I blurted out, louder than I meant to. "Pray to God," was all that she said. We all saw the change when it came. Grandfather's eyes suddenly opened wide and he began to breathe noisily. I thought it meant he had woken up and was going to talk to us again. I was wrong. The harsh breaths stopped. Abba jumped to his feet and stared down at Grandfather with a dreadful look on his face. "What's happened? Has he died?" I said stupidly. "God has taken him," answered Atuolemu. "The arrow has gone to God." He reached out his hand and gently pulled Grandfather's lids over his lifeless, staring eyes. On that sad note, we'll have to find out what happens tomorrow.